You've been told to just move on, to stay positive, to let it go. But deep down, you know it's not that simple. Because how do you move on when the pain still whispers at night? How do you stay positive when your spirit feels shattered? How do you let go when no one ever taught you how to hold what hurts? The truth is, you're not broken. You're not weak. You're just tired. Tired of carrying a heavy heart in a world that moves too fast to notice. But what if I told you that peace isn't found in pretending you're okay? That healing isn't about fixing yourself, but remembering who you really are, the part of you that's deeper than sadness, softer than shame, and stronger than any storm. Tonight, as you listen, something ancient will begin to wake up inside you. A calm, a clarity, a quiet knowing that says, you're not alone. You've never been. Because the Buddha didn't promise a perfect life, he offered a way through the suffering, a path, a light. And as we walk that path together, breath by breath, you'll feel the weight start to lift. The pain won't disappear overnight, but it will lose its grip. And in its place, something new will grow. Stillness, strength, and the gentle joy of simply being alive. This isn't just another sleep story. This is sacred medicine for a hurting soul. A moment to come home to yourself. Are you ready? Let's begin. Before we begin, take a slow breath. Let your body soften just a little. Maybe you've spent the whole day pretending to be okay. Maybe no one noticed the sadness in your voice, or the way your thoughts kept circling like tired birds with nowhere to land. But right now, you don't have to be strong. You don't have to figure anything out. This is not a lesson to master. This is a space to rest, and in that rest, to remember something you may have forgotten. There is a part of you that has never been hurt. It doesn't cry. It doesn't worry. It doesn't need to fix or be fixed. It simply sees, softly, clearly, without fear. It's not your personality, not your past, not the version of yourself you try to be. It's the witness, and it was there before the world told you who you had to become. This is what Zen and Madhyamaka teachings call the unborn mind. Not unborn like a baby, unborn like untouched, unformed, free from the cracks and damage you've come to believe define you. It has no shape, no name, no story, and that's what makes it so powerful. When you were a child, before the world taught you guilt, taught you shame, taught you what to hide and who to please, that part of you was still shining, still watching. Even now, beneath all the pain, it still is. Zen doesn't ask you to believe this blindly. It asks you to look, not with your eyes, but with the deepest part of your awareness. The mind you usually live in, the one tangled in worry and doubt, is just the surface. Beneath it, there is something more spacious. It doesn't argue, it doesn't defend, it just is. And that's your doorway. The Buddha didn't describe awakening as gaining something new. He said it was the end of delusion, the end of mistaking your thoughts and emotions for who you really are, because they come and go, they shift, they break. But what watches them? What's still here, even when everything else changes? That question alone has the power to set you free. In Madhyamaka philosophy, this truth is explored even deeper. It tells us that everything we cling to, even the idea of me, is empty of fixed essence, not meaningless, but free, fluid, interconnected, not solid. And that includes your pain. We're used to thinking of trauma as a stain, a scar that marks us forever. But through the lens of the unborn mind, trauma is something that passed through you, not something that became you. It may have shaped your nervous system, it may have left memories, but the part of you that saw it all, that part was never touched. This doesn't mean we deny pain. It means we no longer give it the power to define us. Try this. When a painful thought rises, I'm not enough, I'll always be broken, no one will ever love the real me. Don't fight it. Don't feed it either. Just see it. Let the thought arise. Watch it like you'd watch smoke drift in the air. And then watch it disappear. It always disappears. That's the nature of thought. It can't stay. It has no weight unless you hold on to it. What remains then when the thought goes? Stillness, presence, awareness. That's your true self, not the thinking, the knowing. It's easy to overlook because it's so quiet. It doesn't shout for attention. But the more you rest in it, the more you start to feel something new, a sense of safety that doesn't depend on anything outside you. This is what Zen calls returning to your original face before you were born. Not literally your face, your being. The one before identity, before trauma, before fear. There's no need to imagine floating in the cosmos or picture yourself as light. This isn't fantasy. This is the most honest, grounded truth. You are already whole. In daily life, this can feel hard to grasp. When someone rejects you, when you feel triggered, when loneliness bites, it's easy to think, if I were truly whole, I wouldn't feel this way. But that's not true. Wholeness doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop believing that your feelings are the full story. You still hurt, but you don't collapse into the hurt. You still fall, but you don't forget how to stand. Because part of you never fell at all. The teachings say, mind, like space, cannot be burned, cut, or broken. It allows all things and clings to none. That's why healing doesn't always look like happiness. It often looks like space. The space to feel sadness without drowning in it. The space to see anger without acting on it. The space to rest when the world tells you to hustle. In that space, you begin to reclaim your life. But it's not about detaching from the world. It's about meeting it differently, from the inside out, from the silence at your core. This silence is not numbness. It's awake. It sees clearly without judging. And in that clarity, suffering begins to dissolve. Not because you've solved it, but because you've seen through it. There's a Zen koan that asks, what is your original nature? And the answer is a laugh, a flower, the sound of the wind, because your original nature isn't a thought. It's reality, as it is, before the mind adds stories. When you start to live from that place, that quiet, watchful presence, your whole experience changes. The pain still comes, but it doesn't define you. The fear still visits, but it doesn't own you. You start to feel rooted in something that doesn't move. And the more you rest there, the less you need from the world to feel okay. The mind we normally live in is full of conditions. I'll feel safe when they love me, when I succeed, when I fix this. But the unborn mind is unconditional. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't demand performance. It simply is. And it gives you permission to be, too. So many of us spend our lives trying to become enough. But what if you were never meant to become anything, just to realize? To realize you already are. Already enough. Already whole. Already free. This doesn't mean you won't have healing work to do. The body still holds pain. The heart still aches. And tending to those parts of you is sacred work. But you do it now from a different place. Not because you're broken, but because you're worth the care. That's the shift. You stop chasing healing like a prize and start living it like a truth. The more you touch this unborn part of yourself, the more natural forgiveness feels, not because you excuse the past, but because you no longer carry it like a wound. You start to see clearly. What happened may have hurt, but it didn't define you. And the one who saw it all, that quiet, spacious awareness, is still here. Always has been. You just forgot, and that's okay. Forgetting is part of being human. Remembering is part of waking up. So don't try to force insight. Don't rush the process. Just notice the breath, notice the watcher, and rest. When thoughts rise, you don't need to fight them. you just don't follow. When emotions surge, you don't need to suppress them, you just let them pass. Not because you're avoiding life, but because you're finally learning how to live it. Without clinging, without resisting, just being. And in that being, something starts to open. Something tender, something brave. A quiet kind of happiness, not loud, not dramatic, but real, grounded, deep. You begin to smile more, not because everything's fixed, but because you remember that nothing was wrong with you in the first place. Not the real you, not the unborn mind. It was always here, patient, still, watching you run in circles, waiting for you to come home. And now, you're beginning to feel it, that stillness behind your eyes, that softness in your breath. It's not sleepiness, it's not numbness, it's peace. The kind that doesn't depend on anything. The kind that says, you're safe now. So, let it hold you. Let it carry you. You don't need to figure it all out tonight. You don't need to know what happens next. You just need to stay here, one breath at a time, resting in the truth that no matter what has happened to you, there is something in you that was never touched by it. And from that place, healing begins, quietly, gently, like morning light. You're not broken. You're just remembering. And now, everything can begin again. You've started to feel it now, that silence within you, the part that watches without fear, without judgment. It doesn't ask for permission to exist, it simply is. And the more you rest in it, the more something begins to shift. There's less noise, less tension, a sense that you don't need to be anyone else to be whole. But even now, something inside still clings to connection, to comfort, to being seen and understood by others, because being alone still feels like a punishment. But what if it's not? What if solitude isn't the wound, but the medicine? There's a kind of aloneness that doesn't break you, but puts you back together. This is what the ancient Theravada monks knew, the arahants. The ones who left everything behind, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. They walked into forests, into caves, into silence. Not because they hated people, not because they gave up, but because they wanted truth. The kind of truth that isn't found in crowds, in conversation, or in affirmation. The kind of truth that comes when there's no one left to perform for. In the West, solitude often feels like exile, but in early Buddhist teachings, it's seen as a return. When everything else is stripped away, roles, names, voices, expectations, you are left face to face with yourself. And while that can feel terrifying at first, it's also where your deepest strength waits. You begin to notice things that were hidden behind distraction, the way your thoughts shape your world, the way emotions move through you when there's no one else to project them onto, the quiet hunger for meaning that no job or relationship could ever satisfy. Radical aloneness isn't about isolating the body, it's about clearing space in the mind. It's the removal of noise, external and internal. When you stop performing, when you stop explaining, when you stop chasing validation, what's left is presence. There are stories in the Pali canon of monks who lived far from any village, surrounded only by nature, speaking to no one for years. Their solitude wasn't a withdrawal from love, it was an act of love. A devotion to truth so deep that it demanded everything false be laid down. They didn't walk away because they were broken. They walked away to find what couldn't be broken. And in that silence, the mind starts to settle. Like muddy water left untouched, it begins to clear on its own. You see the roots of craving not just for material things, but for identity, for control, for certainty. And once seen clearly, those cravings begin to loosen their grip. Solitude doesn't give you new answers. It reveals the ones that have always been inside you. You start to notice how often you've shaped your actions to be seen a certain way. How often you've said yes when your heart said no, just to be accepted. How much you've clung to people, ideas, even pain just to avoid the stillness. But in the absence of distraction, the truth becomes undeniable. You are not your relationships. You are not your status. You are not what others think or say about you. You are consciousness itself, aware, alert, silent. And in that silence, there is power. Not loud power, not dominance, but a quiet, grounded knowing that nothing outside you can complete you. This is why the Arahants didn't fear solitude. They trusted it. They knew that until you're willing to sit with yourself completely, without needing noise, without reaching for escape, you can never fully know freedom. Because freedom isn't found in comfort, it's found in clarity. In solitude, you begin to see how often your suffering came, not from being alone, but from trying to fill the emptiness with the wrong things. Constant stimulation, shallow connections, endless scrolling, over-explaining, over-pleasing. You tried to escape your own company because you believed there was something wrong with it. But what if your own presence is exactly what you've been searching for? When the monks sat alone under trees or in the wilderness, what they were really doing was stripping back the layers of illusion. No audience, no mirrors, no masks. And when all of that falls away, something ancient awakens, the simple presence that doesn't need to prove anything. Solitude becomes not a place, but a way of being. Even in a crowd, even in conversation, you carry a stillness within you. You stop reacting, you stop defending. You begin to respond from a place of peace. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing. You stop trying to be enough, because in your solitude, you saw that you already are. The teachings describe this as the unshakable mind, the mind that doesn't collapse under pressure, that doesn't reach for distraction the moment discomfort arises. It stays, it breathes, it witnesses. And through that witnessing, the pain softens. Because when you stop running from yourself, you realize you were never the enemy. There's a deep healing that only happens in aloneness, not the kind that hides or isolates out of fear, but the kind that sits in stillness, even when it hurts, and whispers, "I'm still here." When the Arahants walked away from the world, they weren't rejecting life. They were entering it fully, without distortion, without needing anything to be different. Their solitude wasn't about punishment. It was about purification, not moral purity, clarity, emptiness of clinging, emptiness of illusion. And from that emptiness came joy. Not excitement, not euphoria, a deeper joy, a joy that asks for nothing. When you've faced yourself completely, not in theory, but in silence, you realize you're not fragile, you're not empty, you're vast. Thoughts arise, emotions rise, but you don't chase them, you don't argue with them, you just let them pass, because you've stopped confusing the storm for the sky. The Buddha often praised solitude as the ideal condition for awakening, not because it guarantees insight, but because it removes the unnecessary. So much of modern suffering comes from too much input, too much comparison, too much noise. Solitude offers a reset, a return to what is real. And what's real is never complicated. It's quiet, it's direct, it's enough. The Arahants knew this. That's why they could live with so little and yet feel complete. They weren't chasing simplicity, they had become simplicity. They no longer needed to explain themselves. Their peace was not performance. It was the result of seeing clearly, over and over, until nothing remained to cling to. That's what radical aloneness gives you, the chance to stop pretending. You let go of the version of yourself that was built for approval. You let go of the story that says you need someone else to fix you. You let go of the need to constantly prove you're okay. Because in the silence, you start to feel a different kind of okay. A quiet, steady okay that doesn't come and go. It's not passive, it's not resignation. It's a fierce kind of contentment rooted in truth, not fantasy. And from that contentment, compassion naturally arises. When you no longer need others to fill your emptiness, you're free to love without grasping, to care without control, to give without expectation. That's the gift of solitude. It makes you whole, so you no longer seek completion outside yourself. You become a refuge for yourself and eventually for others. But it starts with the willingness to be alone, really alone, and to see what's there when the noise stops. Not to punish yourself, but to remember yourself. And once you've seen clearly, you don't go back. Even if you return to the world, the city, the family, the relationships, something inside you remains unchanged, steady, silent, free, because now you know you are never truly alone, not when you've met yourself in stillness, and not when you've seen that the silence was never empty, it was full of everything real, everything lasting, everything true. So stay, just a little longer. Let the world fall away. Let your breath be your only companion. And in that space, listen not to thoughts, not to memories, but to what remains when everything else goes quiet. There is power here, not the kind that controls, the kind that lets go. And in that letting go, you find what was never missing, just waiting. And then the silence teaches you something else, something harder, something necessary, that nothing lasts, not even the silence, not even peace. The moments that feel like home, the people who feel like forever, the chapters that hold your favorite pages, they all end. They always have. And maybe this is where the real ache begins, not in being alone, but in knowing that even the most beautiful things will one day vanish. But this is not the cruelty of life. This is its rhythm. We try to hold what can't be held. We make homes out of passing moments. We build sandcastles. Then we cry when the tide takes them. But the Buddha didn't ask us to stop building. He didn't say to stop loving or laughing or holding things dear. He simply asked us to see clearly that all conditioned things are impermanent. And if they are impermanent, they are also sacred. Because what ends reminds you to love what's here. Because what fades teaches you how to truly see. Grief, when understood, is not the opposite of joy. It is proof that something mattered. But when grief turns to grasping, when we try to freeze what is meant to flow, suffering begins. We suffer not because things end, but because we believed they wouldn't. There's an old story, told in different ways, but always pointing to the same truth. A king asked for a sentence to inscribe on a ring something that would be true in every moment, good or bad. The words were simple. This too shall pass. It comforts in pain. It humbles in joy. It reminds us that nothing stays. But this isn't meant to make you feel hopeless. It's meant to bring freedom. Because if nothing stays, then no pain can last forever. No grief can imprison you permanently, and no failure defines you. This is the sandcastle insight, the knowing that everything you build will one day be washed away. Not because it wasn't worthy, but because the tide was always meant to come. The teachings don't tell you to stop building. They teach you how to build with grace. To know the difference between what's passing and what's permanent, not out there, but in here. What changes is form. What remains is the awareness behind it. This awareness watches the building. It watches the washing away. It doesn't cling to either. This is why the Buddha called impermanence one of the three marks of existence. To see it clearly is to wake up from the dream of permanence. The dream that says, this moment will last, this person will stay, this version of me will never change. And when that dream breaks, we call it loss. But really, it's life being honest. When you learn to walk with impermanence instead of fighting it, grief becomes a teacher, not a punishment, not a curse, but a guide. It shows you where you're still attached. It shows you what you loved, and it shows you where you're resisting the natural flow of life. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. The opposite, actually. You begin to feel more deeply but with less fear. You can cry without clinging. You can remember without aching. You can miss without needing. Because you no longer believe that something has to last forever to be real. There's a tenderness that comes with this insight, a humility. You start to hold things more gently. You start to speak more softly. You begin to thank people, even as they leave, because they were never yours to keep. This isn't detachment. It's devotion to what is, not what was, to what comes and goes, not what should have stayed. In meditation, we see this clearly. A breath rises, a breath falls. No two are the same. Thoughts pass, sensations shift, and yet we continue, witnessing, letting go, over and over. The practice isn't in holding still, it's in staying present as things change. When you live this way, grief changes shape. It stops being a wall and becomes a doorway. You walk through it, not around it. And on the other side is clarity, not numbness. A soft, wide-open clarity that says, this too was life. This too was precious. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence are not just philosophical. They are medicine. They help the heart release what it cannot hold. They help the spirit bow to what it cannot control. Because so much of our suffering is in trying to control what was never ours. We try to freeze the good moments. We try to undo the painful ones. We hold pictures in our minds of how things should be. And we suffer every time life doesn't match the image. But impermanence is not failure. It is the design. The seasons shift, the body ages, the sun rises, and then it sets. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. When you stop resisting that truth, something incredible happens. You begin to savor, you begin to slow down, you begin to see that nothing is too small to matter because it will not last. A smile, a goodbye, a breeze on your skin. They are here, and then they're gone. But you were here for it. You saw it. You lived it. And in that seeing, life becomes a poem instead of a problem. You stop asking it to last and start asking how fully you can meet it. There's freedom in this, a freedom that doesn't come from pushing things away, but from embracing them completely, even as they fade. This is why monks meditate on death, not to be morbid, but to wake up, to see that each breath is borrowed, each moment a gift, and because of that, nothing can be taken for granted. Impermanence doesn't just make you wise, it makes you kind, because when you know that everything you love will one day be gone, you stop wasting time. You stop holding grudges. You start showing up. You hug longer. You say the words you've been afraid to say. You forgive faster, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. There is a strength in accepting the end of things. It takes courage to say goodbye. It takes wisdom to know when to let go. And it takes grace to love fully, knowing it won't last. But what's built in that kind of love never truly disappears. Like a sandcastle seen at sunset, beautiful, impermanent, unforgettable. The tide comes, and it goes. But the heart remembers. And the mind, if it's quiet enough, will see that nothing was ever wasted. Every moment served its purpose. Every chapter played its part. Even the painful ones, especially those. Because they broke what needed to be broken, they ended what needed to end. They cleared the ground so something more honest could grow. This is the rhythm, not just of loss, but of life. Creation, dissolution, return. The more you understand this, the more compassionate you become, not only with others, but with yourself. You forgive the old versions of you, You thank them. They did what they could. They didn't know yet what you're learning now, that nothing is yours to keep, not even your own identity. And so you begin to loosen your grip, not out of apathy, but out of love. You stop holding on so tight. You stop chasing what's leaving. You stop mourning what was never meant to stay. And instead, you honor it. You bow to what's gone. You bless what's ending. You give thanks for what once was. And you let go not into darkness, but into space. The space where something new can arrive. Not a replacement, not a distraction, just the next wave. And you, standing there, hands open, heart soft, breath steady, ready to receive it and ready to release it, all the same. This is not detachment. This is awakening. This is not the end. This is the continuation. And this deep understanding that grief is part of the dance, not a disruption, is what allows you to live fully, not just exist, not just cope, but live. Grieve, yes. Let the tears fall. Let your chest ache. Let your hands feel empty. And then, let your eyes open again. Let the world return to color. Because even if the sandcastle washed away, the sand is still here, still forming, still becoming. And so are you. There's a moment after grief, after the release, where the quiet comes back, but it feels different, heavier. Not because something is missing, but because something inside still smolders. A restlessness that doesn't go away, even when the crying stops. A low heat, buried deep beneath the surface. This is not the ache of loss anymore. It's something else. It's craving. Not always loud, not always obvious. Sometimes it sounds like hope. Sometimes it sounds like guilt. Sometimes it wears the face of desire or the disguise of fear. But at its core, it is grasping, reaching, wanting what is not here, or trying to keep what won't stay. This is the fire the Buddha spoke of, a fire that feeds on attachment, on stories, on wanting things to be other than they are. And as long as that flame has fuel, the burning continues. Nibbana is not a place. It's not a reward for good behavior. It's not something you reach one day if you meditate enough or become pure enough. It is simply the extinguishing of that flame, not by force, not by shame, but by understanding, by letting go of the fuel. We've been taught that pain is the enemy, that suffering should be fought or avoided. But pain isn't the flame, it's the smoke. It's what rises from the fire of craving. And craving survives when we keep feeding it through resistance, through grasping, through trying to control what cannot be held. Letting suffering burn out doesn't mean pretending you don't hurt. It means no longer feeding the part of you that says it shouldn't hurt, the part that argues with life, that tightens against what is. The fire needs fuel. Without it, it dies. This is where wisdom begins, not in fixing the flame, but in seeing what keeps it alive, the stories we repeat, the attachments we refuse to release, the conditions we place on our peace. If you look closely, you'll see it. How often you say to yourself, "I'll be okay if they come back, if I succeed, if I understand why it happened, if I'm not alone, if I become better, quieter, stronger, smarter, more lovable." Each "if" is a log on the fire, and the more you cling to it, the longer the flame stays. But when you stop adding more, when you simply sit and breathe and let the fire be what it is, something begins to shift. Slowly, subtly, like the way a fire dims when there's nothing left to burn. This is not about giving up. It's about surrendering control over things that were never yours to manage. You can't force someone to love you. You can't undo what was done. You can't make the world fit your preferences. But you can stop expecting it to. And in that stopping, you find rest. The teachings of early Buddhism describe Nibbana as cooling. not ecstasy, not endless joy, but relief, like stepping out of the sun after standing in heat for too long, like laying down a burden you didn't realize you were carrying, not because the world changes, but because your relationship to it does. You no longer need it to fill you. You no longer demand that it match your image of what should be. You still feel, but you don't cling. You still care, but you don't chase. You still love, but you stop trying to possess. And that's the difference. The world remains as it is, painful, beautiful, unfair, mysterious, but the fire in you quiets, not by escape, not by force, but by wisdom. This is not suppression. Suppression hides the fire, hides the fuel. It keeps the burning alive under the surface. But wisdom exposes the flame gently. It watches it without judgment. It studies what it feeds on, and eventually it chooses not to feed it anymore. Craving is not only about wanting something more, it's also about resisting what is, wanting things to be different, wanting to avoid what's already happening. The craving says, I shouldn't be feeling this. Wisdom says, this is what's here, let me meet it. This shift doesn't mean the fire disappears instantly. It means you've stopped identifying with it. You stop saying, I am this flame. You start saying, the flame is here and it's passing. Because all things do. Even suffering. When you stop fighting suffering, it changes. Not into joy, necessarily, but into presence, into softness, into understanding. You start to see that so much of your suffering wasn't the pain itself, but your refusal to allow it, the tension around it, the judgment of it, the shame that you weren't stronger, faster, more healed, more spiritual, more enlightened. But what if the way through was not by being more, but by being still, by stopping, by breathing, by waiting? The fire cannot survive forever on its own. It's not eternal. It only burns when you keep throwing thoughts into it, reactions, expectations, resistance. What if, just for tonight, you let the fire burn itself out? Let the ache be there without fixing it. Let the confusion be there without solving it. Let the fear sit in your chest without trying to push it out. And just be the one who notices, the one who watches. That watching, the silent, steady presence that needs nothing. It is not touched by fire. It is not made of craving. It is not seeking escape. It is already free. And the more you rest in that awareness, the less tempting it becomes to add more to the fire. You begin to see that not every feeling needs a reaction. Not every discomfort needs a solution. Not every thought needs a response. You become spacious. You become clear, not through effort, but through allowing. Nibbana is not earned. It's revealed. Revealed when the flame dies out. Revealed when the need to control dissolves. Revealed when the heart becomes still enough to see that there is nothing left to chase. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you powerful in a different way. You no longer fear your own pain. You no longer fear what others might do. You no longer fear the unknown, because you're not depending on any of it for your peace. You've tasted the space beyond it, and once you've tasted that, even briefly, you know. You know that suffering can rise, and it can end. You know that craving can scream, and you don't have to answer. You know that the fire can rage, and you can sit beside it in silence. This is strength. Not the strength of armor, but of emptiness. Not the strength of resistance, but of release. You become untouchable, no, because nothing hurts, but because nothing sticks. It comes, it goes, and you remain. This is the fruit of seeing clearly, the freedom of not feeding the fire. And with time, what rises is not numbness. It's not distance. It's peace. A peace so deep it doesn't need proof. A peace so quiet it needs no explanation. A peace that asks nothing from the world, because it's already whole. And so are you. When the fire stops burning, when craving loses its grip, what rises next isn't always peace. Sometimes it's a question, a quiet voice that asks, why did it happen like this? Why did I go through that? Why does pain echo in patterns I thought I escaped? This is where most people turn to karma, but not the karma they think they understand. Karma has been misunderstood, twisted into something heavy and punishing, a kind of cosmic scoreboard, keeping tally of your mistakes, your regrets, your failures. A system that feels cold and mechanical. Do bad, suffer. Do good, get rewarded. But that's not what the Buddha taught. That's not what karma truly means. Karma is not punishment. It is resonance. It is echo. It is the energy left behind by your thoughts, words, and actions, and the way that energy shapes what comes next. Not because someone is watching and judging, but because the world is made of patterns, and you are not separate from the world. You don't suffer because someone decided you deserve to. You suffer because the vibration of clinging, of fear, of resentment repeats itself, and it repeats because it hasn't been seen clearly. It hasn't been shifted. It hasn't been met with awareness deep enough to change its course. Karma isn't something you carry. It's something you emit. And that's why healing isn't about guilt. It's about frequency. If you walk through life holding shame, believing you are flawed, believing your past defines you, that belief becomes your vibration. You move through the world bracing for impact. You expect pain. And so, your body, your choices, your relationships start to reflect that expectation, not as punishment, but as reflection. This is why changing your story doesn't start with words. It starts with presence. With awareness of what you're putting into the world moment by moment, your tone, your posture, your thoughts, your inner climate. Not to be perfect, not to be pure, but to be aligned. When you start to shift your inner frequency, your outer experience begins to change magically, not instantly, but inevitably, because what you send out begins to shape what you meet. This is karma. And once you see it clearly, it becomes something empowering, not a system to fear, but a path to walk. There's a softness in this view of karma, a grace, because it doesn't say, you deserve this. It says, this is what's resonating, and resonance can be changed. You are not trapped by your past. You are not doomed by your history. You are a dynamic field of energy and intention, and that field responds to the quality of your awareness. What you pay attention to grows. What you feed returns. What you release stops echoing. And the shift happens gently, not through guilt, not through punishment, but through recognition, through turning inward and asking, what am I broadcasting right now? What story am I vibrating with? If you hold bitterness, life starts to taste bitter. If you hold fear, the world begins to feel dangerous. If you hold lack, everything starts to seem not enough. But if you begin to hold peace, even when nothing is perfect, something shifts. If you hold forgiveness, not just for others but for yourself, you create space. If you hold gratitude, not for the fantasy of what could be, but for what is, your resonance deepens. Karma is subtle. It doesn't shout. It hums underneath everything. It shapes your decisions. It colors your mood. It bends your perception. And unless it's brought into the light, it keeps repeating, because that's what energy does. It returns, it ripples, until it's received fully and responded to differently. You can't undo the past, but you can meet its echo with new awareness. You don't have to punish yourself for what you didn't know. You don't have to relive pain to prove you've learned. You simply need to tune into the quality of what you're becoming now. The more present you are, the clearer the echoes become. Not to overwhelm you, but to guide you. A sudden sadness, a feeling of being stuck, an old pattern reappearing. These aren't failures. They are karma calling, out asking to be felt, to be softened, to be understood. Not with analysis, not with judgment, with listening. You can change your karma not by force, but by shifting the way you relate to each moment. If your tendency is to react in anger, then softening into patience, that's the shift. If your tendency is to close when you're hurt, then staying open, that's the shift. If your habit is self-blame, then meeting yourself with kindness, that's the shift. And with each small shift, the echo changes. The ripple moves in a new direction. Not because you've escaped karma, but because you've rewritten its tone. This is not denial of responsibility. It's the deepest kind of responsibility, one that recognizes the power of inner transformation, that understands that healing the world begins with healing your own frequency. The Buddha did not teach karma to shame people. He taught it to liberate them, to show that nothing is fixed, that every cause creates an effect, and that by choosing your causes wisely, your life can take a new shape. This is why mindfulness is so central, because mindfulness tunes you into the frequency you're living in. It helps you pause before reacting. It helps you notice your intentions. And in that noticing, you become free to choose again. You are not your past choices. You are your present capacity to choose differently. And you choose not just with actions, but with energy. Even silence has karma. Even thought has weight. So, be soft with yourself. Not fragile, but clear. What you feed becomes your future. What you allow becomes your echo. The path forward isn't paved with shame. It's made of gentle attention, honest presence, small, consistent shifts in the way you show up for each breath, each feeling, each relationship. No teacher can erase your karma. No ritual can erase your past. But you can transform it, not by erasing, but by integrating. By living in a way that sends out a different vibration, more grounded, more forgiving, more aligned. And that vibration doesn't need approval. It doesn't need to be seen. It changes things quietly. Like warmth shifting the air, like light changing the way a room feels. You've seen the patterns in your life, the same hurt repeating in different forms. That's not punishment. That's invitation. An echo waiting to be met differently. When you do, the pattern breaks, and in its place, something new begins. This is karma, not as a weight, but as a wave. And you are not the shore it crashes into. You are the ocean that responds. So meet each moment with awareness. Not perfection, not pressure, just presence. And in that presence, let your resonance change. Not to become worthy, but because you already are. You've felt the shift. The old echoes no longer pull you in the same way. You're not reacting on autopilot. You're watching more, choosing more. Healing isn't just a hope anymore, it's happening. But now, something subtle starts to rise. You notice how tightly you're holding the very things that helped you get here. The practices, the beliefs, the teachings. Even your identity as someone who is healing, growing, waking up. These things once gave you strength, gave you direction, but now they begin to feel heavy. This is the part no one warns you about. When the tools that helped you cross the river become a weight you can't put down. The rituals, the labels, the rules, even the path itself. At some point, what once opened the door can start to close it again if you don't know when to let go. The Buddha gave a teaching that is simple but often overlooked. A person builds a raft to cross a river. Once they get to the other side, they don't keep carrying the raft on their back. They leave it. Not because it wasn't valuable, but because it's no longer needed. The raft is not the shore. This is where freedom gets real, when you learn to release what once saved you, not because it was wrong, but because it's complete. Spiritual tools are powerful. Meditation, mantras, breathwork, study, devotion, silence, they help regulate the nervous system, open awareness, loosen the grip of ego. They build structure in chaos. They carry you across. But they are not the destination. Freedom is not repeating a ritual perfectly. Freedom is being untouched by the need to repeat anything at all. The mind loves to turn everything into identity, even healing, even awakening. You start saying things like, "I'm a spiritual person. I'm someone who meditates every morning. I'm a seeker." These statements seem harmless, but over time, they harden into rules. You start to fear what happens if you stop. You begin to rely on the form instead of the truth behind it. That's where clinging sneaks back in disguised as discipline. You meditate to feel free, but now you feel anxious if you miss a day. You chant to feel peace, but now you believe the silence won't come unless you say the words. You read sacred texts, but now you're afraid of forgetting a single verse. This is not freedom. This is dependency only now. The object has changed. This doesn't mean the tools were wrong. It means your relationship to them needs to evolve. The raft was perfect for the crossing, but you're on the shore now. The deeper layers of awakening begin when you allow yourself to loosen your grip, to trust that the peace you touched through the practice can now be lived without it, not abandoned, but integrated. You no longer need to light a candle to feel light. You become the light. You don't need to repeat someone's words to feel truth. The truth lives in your breath, in your eyes, in your way of walking through the world. The tools brought you here. They changed your chemistry, your habits, your heart. But at some point, continuing to use them the same way becomes like wearing shoes that no longer fit. The path was never meant to be a permanent identity. It was a passage, a sacred one, yes, but still a passage. This is where some people get stuck. They confuse discipline with truth. They begin to follow the map so closely, they forget to look up and see the landscape. They fear doing it wrong. They cling to the method and forget the purpose. But the truth doesn't live in any particular structure. It breathes where there's space. It appears in the looseness, in the gaps, in the stillness beyond trying. You might start to notice that the need to constantly improve yourself, to be more mindful, more aware, more spiritual is just another craving, another version of not enough. But awakening is not about becoming someone. It's about unburdening who you thought you had to be. Even if that someone was spiritual, even if they meditated every day. There's a danger in believing that freedom looks a certain way. Quiet, calm, serene. A certain posture, a certain vocabulary, a certain routine. But freedom doesn't have a costume. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's wild. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it looks like letting go of every single thing that once gave you comfort. Because comfort is not the same as truth. Truth doesn't need props. It speaks in silence. It rises when there's space. And space cannot exist if your hands are still full. This doesn't mean you throw everything away. It means you stop clinging. You hold lightly. You use what's needed. You let it go when it's not. You stop asking, is this the right technique? And start asking, is this helping me see more clearly? You stop asking, am I doing it perfectly? And start asking, am I free in this moment? Because if you're doing the practice but still feeling small, still feeling afraid of doing it wrong, then the practice has become another cage. The great paradox is that when you finally release the path, that's when you begin to live it. Not because you follow instructions, but because it has become part of you, like salt dissolved in water. No separation, no effort, just presence. You'll know this moment not by how good it feels, but by how light you feel. The absence of pressure, the disappearance of needing to prove anything, the end of striving. There's a maturity that comes with this stage. You no longer chase experiences. You don't look for signs. You're not trying to reach some perfect state. You simply meet what is with softness, with clarity, with enoughness. You see through the illusion that healing means always doing. Sometimes healing means stopping. Sometimes it means resting. Sometimes it means walking away from what used to feel holy, because you've outgrown it. The truth never lives in one container. It meets you where you are, always fresh, always alive. But to meet it, you have to be willing to stop worshipping the old forms, even if they saved you once, even if they felt sacred, because the final step of any sacred tool is release, not rejection, reverence without attachment. That's when devotion becomes real. You bow to the path, and then you walk freely. You remember the teachings, but you're not bound by them. You speak truth, but you don't need anyone to agree. You let life guide your steps, not out of laziness, but because the wisdom is no longer outside you. You've seen the raft, you've crossed the water, and now your bare feet meet the earth. The journey isn't over, but the fear of doing it wrong fades. The anxiety of keeping it together loosens. You begin to trust your own rhythm. You begin to walk, not with rules, but with presence. This is toolless freedom, not empty, full of everything real, everything alive. It's the place where the methods dissolve and only the essence remains. It's the point where you stop saying, "I am on the path," and begin living as the path itself. When the forms fall away and nothing is left but stillness, something stirs beneath the quiet. A question deeper than thought. Not what's next, but where am I in all of this? You've let go of methods. You've released identities. But now the path feels wide and strange again. Not because you're lost, but because you're standing at the edge of something ancient. This is where many turn back, afraid that without structure, there's no guidance. But the truth is, the map was never out there, it was in your story all along. The Buddha's journey is not just history, it's a mirror. His path, from prince to seeker to awakened one, is more than a tale. It's a symbol, and not a distant one. It lives in your breath, in your questions, in your patterns of pain and transformation. His awakening was not meant to be admired from afar. It was meant to be lived, again and again, through your own experience. Not as imitation, but as reflection. Every person who walks the inner path takes this journey, though few recognize it. The palace is the beginning, the place of comfort, control, and surface-level joy. The life built around avoiding discomfort, where pain is distant and truth is hidden behind distractions. The palace is not always luxurious. Sometimes it looks like emotional safety, numbness, overachievement, addiction to approval, or a life carefully designed to avoid collapse. But sooner or later, the cracks appear. Sickness, loss, the death of something you thought was permanent. This is the turning point, the first tremor of truth, the realization that nothing in the palace can protect you from impermanence, the awareness that suffering exists and that no external fix can truly end it. In the Buddha's story, this moment came as the four sights: old age, sickness, death, and a wandering monk. In your story, they come differently: a breakup that shatters your illusions, a betrayal that rips off the mask, a moment in silence where you realize how lost you feel beneath your achievements. This is the beginning of your pilgrimage, not toward a place, but away from the illusion of safety. Leaving the palace means stepping into the unknown, letting go of certainty, questioning everything you've built. And not because it was wrong, but because it's no longer enough. The next phase is the search, the wandering, the trying on of new beliefs, new systems, new identities. You seek teachers, methods, answers. You read, listen, meditate, pray. You feel bursts of clarity, followed by waves of confusion. You think you've found the truth, then it slips away again. This is the forest, the space between who you were and who you will become. It's messy, uncertain, necessary. The Buddha tried extreme paths, fasting, self-denial, philosophical systems. You may do the same. Chase perfection, reject pleasure, attach to ideologies. Try to transcend what feels too human. But eventually, these extremes exhaust you. They don't deliver the freedom they promised. This is the moment you sit down beneath the tree. The Bodhi tree is not just a location. It's a symbol of turning inward, of stopping the search, of no longer looking outside for peace. It's the decision to face everything without distraction, to sit with your mind as it is, to see your own attachments, fears, and illusions clearly. Under the Bodhi tree, you don't become someone else. You meet what's always been here. But this is not peaceful at first. This is where Mara comes. Mara is the voice of fear, doubt, desire, identity. The voice that says, "You're not ready. This is pointless. You'll never change." Mara shows up as craving, as resistance, as every thought that tries to pull you away from presence. Meeting Mara is not failure. It is the core of the path. Because Mara's power is only illusion. He cannot hurt you. He can only convince you to abandon yourself. But if you stay, if you keep sitting, breathing, watching, something begins to shift. You see that the thoughts are not true. The emotions are not forever. The stories are not you. And in that moment, the mind softens. The grip loosens. The flame burns out. Not with a bang, but with a quiet exhale. This is awakening. Not a lightning bolt, not perfection, just seeing clearly, just resting in the truth that nothing needs to be different for peace to be here. But even this is not the end. After awakening, the Buddha did not stay beneath the tree. He stood up. He walked back into the world, not to escape, but to serve, to live the truth he had seen. You too must return, but you return differently. Not with the same attachments, not with the same confusion. You return with eyes that see through illusion, with a heart that holds suffering gently, with a mind that no longer clings. And this return is not about preaching or fixing others. It's about living fully, listening deeply, walking with presence in every step. You become a quiet source of peace, not through effort, but through alignment. This is how the inner pilgrimage completes its first cycle. But it doesn't end. The path spirals. Life will bring new palaces, new forests, new trees. Each time, the journey deepens. Each time, you shed another layer of self that no longer fits. And each time, the awakening becomes more embodied. This is the gift of seeing your story through the lens of myth. You stop thinking you're broken. You realize you're walking a path walked by thousands before you. Their suffering, their doubt, their joyful reflections of your own. You're not failing, you're unfolding. Every chapter has purpose, even the parts that don't make sense yet, especially those. When you honor your life as pilgrimage, every step becomes sacred, every emotion becomes a teacher, every moment becomes part of your awakening. Not because it's perfect, because it's real. And reality, met with presence, is always enough. You don't need to escape your story. You need to meet it differently. With eyes that see the palace for what it is, with courage to leave it, with patience in the forest, with stillness beneath the tree, and with gentleness when you rise and walk again. This is the way. This is your way. Keep walking. Even after walking so far, after shedding old identities and sitting in deep silence beneath your own inner tree, there are still moments that bring you to your knees, not in defeat, but in something more raw. A kind of tenderness you didn't expect. You've seen through so many illusions, but part of you still carries the weight of your human story. The parts you judged, the parts you tried to hide. The shame that didn't vanish just because you understood its roots. The despair that still lingers quietly in your chest. Not every wound dissolves through insight alone. Some need to be met through the body, felt fully, brought into gravity. And this is where another doorway opens, not through thought, not through stillness, but through a physical gesture so simple, so ancient, that it goes deeper than words. Touching the earth. This movement is not symbolic. It's not performance. In the Buddhist traditions of Southeast Asia and Tibet, it's a gesture of direct truth. In Pali, it's called Bhumisparsha Mudra, the earth-touching gesture. It's not just the image of the Buddha calling the earth to witness his awakening. It's a somatic memory passed down through centuries of what it means to face your pain, not with your mind, but with your whole being. When the Buddha sat beneath the tree and Mara's voices tried to shake him, fear, temptation, doubt that didn't argue, he didn't resist. He simply reached his hand down and touched the ground. Not to claim victory, but to root himself in reality. In that moment, the earth became his witness, his stability, his reminder that he belonged here, fully, completely, without needing permission. And this is the secret that so many modern paths miss. You can understand impermanence. You can loosen your craving. You can reframe karma. But if your body still believes you are wrong, if your spine still folds under shame, if your breath still holds the imprint of unworthiness, then the healing remains incomplete. The body holds what the mind cannot. Bowing is not submission. It is not weakness. It is the body's way of releasing pride without humiliation, a way of letting go without collapse, a way of saying, I am here, I am real, I am human, and I am allowed to be. In traditional Buddhist cultures, bowing is not rare. It is woven into daily life. People bow to monks, to elders, to sacred images, to the earth itself. Not because they are small, but because they remember their place not above, not below, but in harmony. Bowing reminds us of relationship, of humility without shame, of reverence without self-erasure. But in the West, bowing is often misunderstood. We are taught to stand tall, to stay proud, to avoid vulnerability. We fear bowing because we fear being less. But in truth, bowing allows us to be more grounded, more honest, more real. The act of lowering your head below your heart shifts everything. It resets your nervous system. It releases stored tension in the neck, shoulders, spine. It disrupts the inner voice that says, you must hold it together. It brings you back to a deeper order, one where you don't have to prove anything. And when you bow, fully knees to floor, forehead to earth, something ancient unlocks. The thinking mind softens. The armor breaks open gently. Tears come, not from pain, but from relief. This is not about worshipping a statue or following a ritual blindly. It is about reclaiming your right to falter, release control, to yield without losing dignity. Bowing can be a ceremony of truth, a way to meet your inner child, your ancestors, your grief, your joy. A way to say, I trust the ground beneath me, even when I don't trust myself. In Thai temples, bowing happens in a rhythmic pattern: 3 full prostrations to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Each one an offering, a surrender, a grounding. In Tibetan practice, full body prostrations are done across great distances, pilgrims traveling for miles, bowing every few steps, not for merit, for cleansing, for opening. These practices are not performances. They are physical prayers, movements that bring emotion into the flesh, that move energy through the bones, that allow the weight of suffering to drain down into the earth. Because the earth can hold what we cannot. And that's what the Buddha remembered under the tree note. Just that truth was real, but that the earth could carry it, could hold him, could receive him exactly as he was. Shame dissolves in the presence of something larger, not through erasing the past, but through anchoring in what doesn't judge. The earth does not ask if you're good enough. It simply supports, constant, patient, unmoving. And when you bow, you return to that support. You let go of the story that says you are alone in your pain, because the earth has held the tears of millions. It knows despair. It knows healing. It knows the cycles of life that your mind forgets when it's caught in survival. Touching the earth is a kind of remembering that you don't need to rise to be worthy, that your surrender is not failure, that your pain is not proof of your inadequacy. It is part of the weight you are allowed to place on the ground. Some people bow once a day, some bow 100 times, some bow with words, some in silence, some to the Buddha, some to their breath, some to their own resilience. It doesn't matter what you bow to. It matters that you let yourself bow, because in that moment, something sacred unfolds, not outside, but within. The nervous system learns safety, the heart learns softness, the body learns trust. And slowly, the shame loosens. The despair lightens, not through explanation, through gravity. This is healing that doesn't need intellect, it doesn't need understanding, it needs only willingness to meet yourself on the floor, to let go of being above your suffering, to meet it where it lives. Over time, bowing becomes more than a practice. It becomes a posture of being. You begin to walk with less tension. You begin to speak with more gentleness. You begin to see others, not from above or below, but as reflections of the same earthbound miracle you are. Humility becomes beauty. Vulnerability becomes strength. Because now you know the ground holds everything, and you no longer have to. This is the gift of touching the earth, not as a technique, but as truth, as medicine that cannot be swallowed, only surrendered to, as a language older than words, a gesture that says what the heart has always known. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to release. And when you do, the earth will meet you, every time, without question, without condition, because it always has. There's something that begins to shift after you've bowed, after you've surrendered fully to the earth, not as a sign of weakness, but as a deep act of truth. You feel lighter, yes, but also more exposed. There's no hiding now. What the mind had pushed down, what the body had been carrying silently for years, begins to surface. Not to punish you, but to be seen, to be felt, to be held without turning away. It's not linear. Emotions don't arrive one by one like polite guests. They rise all at once, in strange combinations, like weather systems you never agreed to, and it can be confusing. One moment, you feel hollow. The next, you're furious, then anxious, then indifferent. Sometimes, all in the same hour. This is not chaos. It's the unfolding of something ancient inside you. The internal landscape of being human, messy, sacred, and often misunderstood. But Buddhism offers a lens that brings clarity to this storm, not to control it, but to understand it. The 6 realms are not distant metaphysical destinations. They are psychological realities. They are the emotional worlds we move through, often unconsciously, many times a day. Not heaven or hell as punishments or rewards, but states of mind and body shaped by how we perceive and react to our experience. When you feel swallowed by despair, hopeless and numb, You are in the hell realm. Not because you've done something wrong, but because pain has condensed so tightly that it cuts off light. Hell is not fire, it is isolation, disconnection, the belief that suffering will never end. When you find yourself gripped by anger, by resentment, by the instinct to fight or strike out, you are in the realm of the asuras, the jealous gods. This realm is driven by comparison, by the ache to win, to be seen, to prove your worth through struggle. There is intelligence here, but it is laced with poison. When anxiety takes over, when you're consumed by fear of losing what you have or not getting what you need, you are in the realm of hungry ghosts. This is not about wanting more. It's about never feeling like enough. The hunger is not for things, but for peace, love, rest, things that feel just out of reach. When life feels grey, flat and meaningless, when you drift without energy or purpose, you are in the animal realm. This is not stupidity, it's survival, functioning without awareness. Doing what's expected, staying safe, avoiding change. It's protective, but it's also a prison. When you are endlessly busy, always striving, always planning your next move, never content, this is the human realm. It is the realm most people live in, full of potential, full of dissatisfaction, always reaching, rarely arriving. And when you feel blissful, in control, admired, powerful, when everything seems to go your way, and you begin to believe you've transcended your pain, you're in the God realm. But even this realm is unstable, because gods fall, and the higher you are, the further there is to drop. These realms are not judgments, they are invitations to look more closely. Because once you can name where you are, you can stop believing that it's permanent. You can stop thinking it's who you are. You begin to understand that depression is not your identity. It is the echo of the hell realm, asking for warmth, for presence, for reconnection. Rage is not failure, it is the cry of the jealous God, asking to be held without being shamed. Anxiety is not a flaw, it is the hunger of the ghost, asking not for certainty, but for enoughness. Numbness is not laziness, it is the freeze of the animal, asking for safety before it dares to feel again. Striving is not wrong, it is the engine of the human, asking for meaning. Elation is not escape, it is the song of the God, asking to remember that all things pass. None of these states are fixed. You are not stuck in any of them forever. But they repeat when they are not seen. They repeat when you reject them. They repeat when you identify with them. To navigate them consciously means to notice which realm you're in without self-judgment. It means asking, not what's wrong with me, but what is this realm asking me to feel more fully? Hell asks for compassion. Jealousy asks for understanding. Hunger asks for enoughness. Animal mind asks for gentleness. Human striving asks for rest. God realm pride asks for humility. When you meet these states with presence, something changes, not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. The realm begins to soften. The emotional grip begins to release, and something underneath it starts to breathe again. This is what is meant by emotional rebirth. Not the absence of difficult feelings, but the transformation of your relationship to them. The realization that even your darkest moods are part of a sacred cycle. They do not mean you're lost. They mean you're being called back to yourself. You don't have to escape the realm to wake up. You have to see it, fully, gently, with your whole being. And that seeing, if done deeply enough, becomes liberation. Some days you will cycle through 3 or 4 realms before breakfast. That's not failure, that's awareness. Some days you will find yourself back in one realm you thought you left behind. That's not regression, that's deepening. Because each return offers new wisdom. Each visit teaches you something different. The realms are not mistakes, they are mirrors. And the more clearly you look, the more freedom you find. You begin to realize that you are not defined by which realm you're in, but by the clarity with which you walk through it. And you are never walking alone, because others are in these realms whether they know it or not. Your awareness can help them, not by fixing them, but by not adding more confusion. When you stop judging yourself for your depression, you stop judging others for theirs. When you can feel your own rage without acting it out, you make space for others to do the same. When you understand your own hunger, you stop resenting those who seem too needy. When you respect your own numbness, you respect others' pace. When you allow your own striving to rest, you give others permission to stop trying so hard. When you see your own ego with compassion, you stop needing others to fall for you to feel high. This is what the Buddha saw: not a ladder to climb, but a cycle to understand. You are not failing when you suffer. You are being offered a gate. And each realm has its own key. That key is awareness, gentle, embodied, honest awareness. With that, you move differently. You don't cling when things feel good. You don't collapse when things feel unbearable. You bow in the God realm. You breathe in the hell realm. You rest in the human realm. You soothe in the ghost realm. You listen in the animal realm. You soften in the realm of jealousy. This is not spiritual bypassing. It's depth. It's real contact. It's the willingness to face the whole range of your inner world, not to fix, but to meet. And in that meeting, the realms begin to lose their solidity. They become passing clouds. You remain the sky. And in that sky, even pain becomes holy. Even struggle becomes sacred. Not because it's pretty, but because it's part of what wakes you up. After walking through the emotional realms, something becomes clear. You've felt the heat of rage, the cold of despair, the endless hunger of anxiety. You've bowed to the earth and watched your shadows rise. But underneath it all, there was always something quiet holding you, something you couldn't quite name. And now, you begin to sense it more clearly, not as thought, not as voice, but as presence. Subtle, gentle, steady. A presence that says, even in your deepest solitude, you were never truly alone. When everything around you falls silent, and even your own thoughts start to fade, what remains is not emptiness. It is connection. Not to people in the ordinary sense, not to faces or names or voices, but to a lineage of wisdom, still and alive beyond time. This is the silent Sangha. In the Buddhist tradition, the Sangha is one of the three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It usually refers to the community of practitioners, the ones you sit with, learn with, walk the path beside. But there's another Sangha, less spoken about. A Sangha that is not visible, not physical. A presence felt through stillness, invoked through sincerity. A web of support that stretches across centuries, beyond borders, through lifetimes. This is the Sangha of the awakened ones. Not just the famous names in history books, but the quiet beings who cultivated stillness, who burned through illusion, who carried their wisdom silently across time. And when you sit with genuine intent, when you open your heart not to an image but to truth, you begin to feel them. They are not spirits in the ghostly sense. They are not watching you with eyes, but their presence lives in the field of awareness, like a frequency you tune into when the noise drops low enough. A field of consciousness shaped by those who have walked through suffering and found the other side. There are moments when you meditate, or sit in silence after a breakdown, or return to breath after an overwhelming day, and you feel this gentle support like something wordless holding your spine upright. Not pushing, just being, not solving, just witnessing. You don't have to be in a monastery to feel this. You don't have to know ancient texts or chant in Pali or wear robes. All you need is honesty. All you need is willingness to sit down and stop pretending. The moment you touch that sincerity, the moment you stop performing and start listening, the silent Sangha meets you. This connection is not created, it is remembered. You come from a long line of beings who suffered, who questioned, who broke down, who sat through it, who walked out clearer. They may not have left books behind, but their work is still here. You are not the first to feel lost, you are not the first to doubt, and you are not the first to rise again. There's something deeply healing in this, because even when the people around you don't understand your pathivan, when friends pull away, when you outgrow old connections, when you feel like the only one waking up in a world that wants to stay asleep, you are still part of something vast and real. When the Buddha sat beneath the tree, he was alone, but also not. He was walking into a space many had approached before him. He was sitting in the silence that carries every question ever asked about the meaning of pain. He was not performing for others. He was not trying to be a hero. He was remembering. And this remembering is available to you too. It begins by turning inward, not with effort, but with stillness, by releasing the need to find your tribe in outward form, by recognizing that spiritual isolation is often the sign that you are standing at a deeper threshold, and that in that threshold you are surrounded not by chatter, not by applause, but by presence. It's not fantasy, it's not imagination. It's the field of consciousness shaped by thousands who have sat and seen and softened and become free. That field doesn't die. It lingers. It welcomes. And when you soften your body and say yes to the present moment without needing it to change, you enter that field. You become part of it. You don't have to prove yourself to belong. You don't have to get rid of your fear. You don't have to reach some level of progress. The moment you bow to truth, whatever your truth is, now you are joined by every being who has ever done the same. This presence doesn't fix you. It doesn't lift you out of your suffering. It simply holds you as you walk through it. You may feel it as a slight warmth in the room, a softening in your chest, a flicker of calm in the middle of your storm. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it is unmistakable. This is not something you can force. If you try to chase it, it vanishes. But when you settle into presence with humility, when you stop demanding that life feel a certain way and start simply being with it, that's when the door opens. Some call this the ancestors of awakening. Others call it the lineage of the heart. Whatever name you give it, the truth is the same. You are not alone on this path. Even when your room is empty, even when your phone is silent, even when no one understands your transformation, you are held in a deeper community. One that doesn't demand that you perform. One that never turns away when you're broken. One that doesn't disappear when you fall apart. This presence becomes more than comfort. It becomes guidance. You start to sense when your mind is slipping into distraction. You begin to feel when your speech is out of alignment. You notice more quickly when your heart closes. Not because someone tells you, but because the field you are connected to whispers gently, return. This whisper is not moral, it's not judgment, it's resonance. You begin to tune yourself like an instrument, not to be good, but to be true. And every time you realign with that truth, no matter how many times you forget, you strengthen your part in the Sangha. You become one more point of clarity for those who will come after. This is how the field stays alive, not through institutions, not through formal teachings, but through presence, through sincere human beings choosing to wake up in the middle of their ordinary lives. There is something incredibly beautiful about this, because it means you don't need to be a teacher, you don't need to be seen, you don't need a platform or a title. Your presence, when it's aligned with truth, is enough. Sitting quietly in your apartment after a day of confusion, breathing through your shame, noticing your fear without fleeing from it, you are strengthening the silent Sangha. Standing in line at the store, feeling overwhelmed, And choosing to ground yourself in the body, you are anchoring the field. Listening deeply to someone who is in pain, without fixing or judging, you are keeping the thread alive. This is the most sacred kind of service. One that asks for nothing and leaves no trace, but transforms everything. And over time, you begin to trust it, even when no one notices, even when no one thanks you, even when it feels like nothing's changing, because you start to feel the quiet support in your spine, the invisible network of awakening surrounding you like a net, always there, always open, always waiting for you to slow down enough to feel it. The silent Sangha is not a place you go, it is a place you return to, a space you carry inside you. It becomes your refuge when the world feels too loud. It becomes your reminder when you want to give up. It becomes your mirror when you forget who you are. And you can call on it, not with words, not with rituals, just with sincerity. Sitting down, being still, saying inwardly, I'm ready to remember. And the remembering will come, quietly, gently, without fanfare, just a sense of being held. Not because you've done enough, but because you are enough. You always were. Even with the comfort of a silent presence holding you, there are still moments when nothing makes sense. You may sit in stillness and feel nothing but a heavy, pressing weight that will not lift. No memory of clarity, no glimpse of peace, just the raw experience of collapse, when even the most honest effort to breathe or stay present feels like too much. When your spiritual progress, your insights, your rituals, none of them touch the depth of what has been torn open inside. This is not failure, this is not weakness. This is where the deeper doorway begins. There is a kind of despair that arrives not to destroy you, but to strip everything false. It doesn't come from indulgence or carelessness. It comes from exhaustion of the soul, of the ego, of the mind, trying to make meaning out of things that will never be fixed with thought. And as painful as this despair feels, it may be the most honest moment you've ever had, because it is here, in the ruins, that the truth finally has space to speak. The Buddha's first noble truth is often heard as a sentence, "Life is suffering." But that's not what it means. The actual Pali word, dukkha, is more layered. It means friction, misalignment, unease, the subtle ache of things not quite fitting, the rawness of being human in a world that changes without your permission. The truth isn't that life is all pain. It's that pain is an inseparable part of being alive. But this truth isn't meant to depress you. It's meant to awaken you. It is not a conclusion, it is a beginning. It is the first door, the moment where you stop running, the place where all the noise breaks down, and you are left with the most sacred recognition. This hurts, and that's real. No more pretending, no more justifying, no more waiting for the right conditions. Just the raw honesty that what you feel is valid. And in that honesty, something deeper starts to take shape. This kind of despair is noble not because it's glamorous, but because it tells the truth without dressing it up. It reveals what cannot be denied, that we suffer, that we long, that we lose, that we don't understand, that we carry wounds we didn't ask for, and that we are still here, not in defiance, but in quiet recognition. There is a strength in facing despair without needing to transform it right away. The urge to fix, to label, to find a lesson too quickly can itself be a form of avoidance. But noble despair asks for stillness. It asks you to stop seeking and simply fall into what is already here. This collapse is not a collapse of worth. It is the collapse of old structures, of beliefs that no longer hold, of stories you've outgrown. And while it may feel like you're breaking, you are in fact making space. This is what the first noble truth offers, a map that begins where you are, not where you think you should be. It doesn't tell you to escape your suffering. It tells you to meet it. And through that meeting, the rest of the path unfolds not as philosophy, but as necessity. Awakening doesn't begin when you feel ready. It begins when you have nothing left to hold on to. When the mind finally admits it doesn't know. When the heart finally says, I cannot carry this alone. And in that surrender, a crack opens, a sliver of light. Not hope in the conventional sense, but presence. A quiet willingness to feel what's actually here. Despair becomes noble not by removing the pain, but by reframing it as doorway, not dead end. The shift is subtle but real. You stop asking, how do I get out of this? And start asking, what is this showing me? Not as a mental trick, but as an embodied question. You feel your way through it, not to escape it, but to stay close to the truth it holds. In that closeness, something ancient within you responds. The part of you that has survived every collapse. The part that watched, silently, while everything you thought would last came undone. That part has never judged you. It only waits for you to remember that even your darkest pain is a chapter in a much older story. You begin to understand that spiritual truth doesn't always feel like clarity. Sometimes it feels like falling apart, because the ego cannot awaken. It must dissolve. And despair is often the force that begins the dissolving. You don't need to make despair meaningful for it to matter. Its value is in its honesty. It's one of the few states where the mask finally falls, where you stop performing, where you no longer care about appearing strong or together. And in that collapse, something very still and very real begins to surface. It isn't flashy. It doesn't come with fireworks. It just feels like being exactly where you are fully, without defense. And when you meet yourself there, something inside relaxes. Not because the suffering is over, but because it has been seen, truly seen. The first noble truth doesn't ask you to dwell in suffering. It asks you to no longer look away from it, to walk straight into its core with your eyes open, your breath steady, your hands empty. And when you do, you realize the truth. Suffering is not the end of the story. It is the threshold. Through it, you begin to feel what cannot be broken. Not the false self, but the deeper awareness that remains when the false self fades. The awareness that has room for everything, even despair. This awareness holds no judgment. It doesn't rush your process. It doesn't compare your pain to others. It simply says, this too belongs. And that's what despair is asking for. Not explanation, not escape. Belonging. To be met. To be honored. To be given the dignity of presence. You don't have to rise quickly. You don't have to pretend you're okay. But you can sit inside the fire without feeding it. You can breathe inside the ache without drowning. Because even in the collapse, there is awareness. And awareness is already free. This is what turns despair noble, the presence that watches without pushing. The stillness that says, stay here, don't run, let this become what it needs to become. And slowly, that despair shifts. Not into joy, not into answers, but into space. Room to breathe again, not because anything changed, but because your relationship to it did. You stop needing the pain to leave in order to feel peace. You begin to trust that awakening doesn't erase the ache. It softens your resistance to it. And in that softening, a new kind of strength arises. The kind that doesn't clench, the kind that doesn't prove, the kind that can sit with tears on your face and still know, this is part of it. This is what the first noble truth is really saying. Not that life is nothing but pain, but that pain, met with presence, becomes the starting point, the fire that melts what is false, the mirror that shows you where you are, the invitation that says, if this hurts, good. It means you're awake enough to feel. And if you can feel, you can listen. And if you can listen, you can remember. And if you can remember, you can walk the path not away from this place, but through it, with nothing to prove and nothing to fear. After facing despair without turning away, something inside begins to reassemble, quietly, slowly. You don't rise as the same person. You come back softer, clearer, emptied in a way that makes room for something deeper. But as you re-enter life, the world doesn't wait. People still hurt. Suffering still surrounds you. And now, with your heart more open, you begin to feel it all more intensely. The grief in others, the chaos in the collective, the pain that moves through those you care for. You want to help. You want to serve. But slowly, something starts to wear thin. The weight begins to return not as personal pain, but as a burden of care. You notice a subtle fatigue growing in the background, not from laziness, not from disconnection, but from feeling too much, for too long, without pause. This is compassion fatigue. Even those on the deepest spiritual path are not immune to it. In fact, they may be more vulnerable. The more awake you are, the more suffering you're aware of, not just your own, but everyone's. And if you're not careful, your empathy begins to bleed into exhaustion. You start to carry what cannot be carried alone. This is especially true for those drawn to service. Teachers, healers, caregivers, activists, parents, empaths. You give because you see the need, because your heart can't ignore it. But without balance, that giving can become a slow depletion, a slow fading of your own light. Not from weakness, from love that hasn't learned to rest. And this is where the Bodhisattva path becomes misunderstood. Many hear the Bodhisattva vow, the promise to stay in this world until all beings are free, and mistake it as a commitment to endless self-sacrifice. An identity that says you must never turn away, must never rest, must always be available. But that's not what the vow means. It is not a vow to drown. It is a vow to serve wisely. The Bodhisattva is not a martyr. They are someone who sees the truth of suffering, awakens to it, and chooses to walk back into the world, not to fix it all, but to remain present within it. To serve from a place of balance, not burnout. Compassion is not sustainable when it's rooted in guilt. It is not pure when it comes from fear of being selfish. It is not whole when it forgets to include yourself. True compassion has rhythm. It breathes. It knows when to act and when to step back, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to offer and when to simply witness. The Bodhisattva path requires the kind of clarity that says yes to service without saying no to self-respect, the kind of strength that rests before breaking, the kind of devotion that knows fatigue is not a flaw, but a message. This message often comes through the body tightness in the chest, brain fog, irritability, emotional numbness, a subtle bitterness toward those you once felt love for. These are not signs that you failed. They are signs that something sacred within you needs to be replenished. The second wind of the Bodhisattva doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from reconnecting to why you gave in the first place. From remembering that compassion is not a performance, it's a presence. You begin to see that helping others is not about holding everything for them. It's about holding space without losing yourself in the process. And that space requires boundaries, not walls, but intelligent edges. Boundaries that protect your capacity to keep showing up, that allow you to say, I care deeply and I need rest. That honor your humanity as much as anyone else's. Because without that, the giving turns hollow, the empathy becomes reactive, the heart shuts down while the mouth keeps smiling, and that dissonance creates more suffering, not less. The Bodhisattva's strength is not in how much they do, it's in how clearly they see. And what they see is this: no one is free if you are secretly falling apart while trying to save others. There is a paradox here. The more attuned you become, the more your system registers pain around you. But you cannot meet every cry. You are not meant to absorb every wave. This is why meditation, silence, solitude, these are not luxuries. They are forms of hygiene for the soul. They reset your nervous system. They remind you that the world's pain is real, but so is your need to step back and touch the silence beneath it. The Bodhisattva's second wind comes when they remember that saving all beings doesn't mean saving them all at once. It means walking with them, being part of the unfolding, offering presence, not solutions. It comes when you allow yourself to feel joy again, not as denial, but as resilience. When you stop equating your usefulness with how much you suffer for others, when you give because it overflows, not because you're trying to prove something, when you remember that even the Buddha had to rest. This rest is not retreat, it is realignment. It is the breath you take before the next step. It is the stillness that makes your compassion real again. And from that stillness, you remember that being a bodhisattva doesn't mean being above suffering. It means being honest about it. You are allowed to feel overwhelmed. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to take time, not to escape, but to restore the clarity you need to serve from truth. Clarity that says, I cannot pour from an empty cup. Clarity that says, my compassion deepens when I stay rooted in myself. The world does not need more burnt-out healers. It needs more whole ones, more grounded ones, more clear-hearted ones. This is the second wind, not a burst of energy, but a shift in relationship. You begin to see service not as output, but as presence. Not as exhaustion, but as offering what is truly sustainable. And that offering can be small. A breath, a moment of deep listening, a word spoken from alignment, a pause instead of a reaction, a kind glance at yourself when you forget and get tired again. Each act becomes more powerful, not because of its size, but because it comes from wholeness. The Bodhisattva's vow is not an obligation, it's a rhythm, a remembering, a return. You keep coming back not because you're forced to, but because you've touched something real. And that reality fuels your movement, not with pressure, but with quiet purpose. So let yourself rest. Let yourself feel. Let yourself be held, even if no one sees how much you carry. And when you rise again, let it be not from guilt, but from love. Not from fear, but from clarity. That is the vow, and it is still alive in you. Even after reconnecting to purpose, even after reclaiming rest, there remains a tension. The mind keeps working, turning, planning. It wants to know what's next. It wants to solve. It wants answers, outcomes, clear steps forward. You find yourself asking again, am I doing enough? Am I on the right path? How do I stay open without being overwhelmed? And the questions themselves begin to weigh more than the pain ever did. This is where exhaustion returns, not of the body, not even of the heart, but of the mind that cannot stop trying to figure everything out. The mind that searches for clarity and only finds more questions. The mind that mistakes overthinking for wisdom. The mind that believes peace can be reached by understanding every angle, naming every pattern, finding the perfect practice. But the truth is, the mind will never solve what the heart needs to surrender. This is the beginning of not knowing. Not knowing isn't ignorance. It isn't failure. It isn't confusion. It's something much more profound. It is the quiet willingness to stop grasping for answers. To sit fully inside uncertainty without demanding it makes sense. To let go of the illusion that your healing depends on understanding everything. In Zen, they call this beginner's mind or don't know mind. It is not passive. It is not indifference. It is a radical return to presence, free from the habit of defining and controlling. A mind that sees clearly because it is not cluttered with conclusions. This surrender is not easy, especially for those who've walked a long path. The longer you've searched, the more invested the mind becomes in finishing the story. But healing is not a story with a perfect ending. It is a space where life is met as it is, not as we wish it to be. The mind will always seek safety through understanding, but understanding is not the same as peace. There are wounds that will never be fully explained. There are patterns that will not neatly resolve. There are emotions that rise without a name. And in the space of not knowing, they are allowed to exist. This is not giving up. It is letting go. Letting go of the pressure to interpret every feeling. Letting go of the task of decoding every thought. Letting go of the idea that freedom lives on the other side of a well-formed insight. The mind believes it is responsible for your safety. It works hard to make sense of your suffering, and for a while, it helps. It organizes chaos, it creates frameworks, but eventually, its limits are revealed. And when those limits are reached, not knowing becomes the only door forward. To surrender into not knowing is to release the idea that healing must be earned through explanation. It is to trust what is present over what is proven. It is to soften into experience, rather than stand above it with analysis. This kind of surrender doesn't reject thought, it simply puts it in its rightful place. Thought becomes a tool, not a master, a lens, not a prison. You begin to see that the most healing moments often arrive without mental preparation. A wave of clarity during a walk, a sudden calm during deep fatigue, a quiet knowing during grief. These are not the products of thinking harder. They are what arise when the noise stops. Not knowing clears the way for grace, and grace does not arrive through force. It arrives through openness, through stillness, through the space where no one is trying to fix anything. Zen teachers speak of no gaining mind, the attitude of doing not to get, but to be. Sitting not to become enlightened, but to sit. Breathing not to calm the body, but to breathe. Meeting pain not to eliminate it, but to feel it fully without resistance. This is emotional surrender, not as passivity, but as intimacy. You become intimate with what is real, instead of constantly trying to improve or escape it. And in that intimacy, you begin to feel held, not by answers, not by conclusions, but by the simplicity of the moment. This approach breaks the habits of a lifetime. Most of us are taught that knowledge is safety, that certainty is strength. But Zen points to something deeper. That real strength is the ability to remain soft in the middle of not knowing. You don't close. You stay open, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. And in that openness, you begin to notice what thinking had hidden. The texture of your breath, the heaviness in your legs, the sadness behind the anger, the longing beneath the silence. These are not things to solve. They are things to feel. Not knowing allows the emotions to pass through fully, not because you've labeled them, but because you've stopped pushing them away. This is why so many breakthroughs come when you stop trying, when you pause, when you say, "I don't know," and that's okay. The nervous system begins to relax in not knowing. It no longer braces against the future. It no longer clings to what already passed. It starts to settle into what is, even if it's uncertain, even if it's messy. This settling is not stagnation, it is depth. Depth does not mean complexity, it means contact. Contact with your breath, contact with your body, contact with what hurts, without rushing to fix it. From this depth, insight arises not as an answer, but as a shift, a softening, a breath you didn't realize you were holding, a tear that falls without explanation, A peace that comes not because everything is solved, but because you've stopped resisting what is unsolved. Zen invites you to live from this space, to wake up not because you've figured life out, but because you're no longer arguing with it. To trust that truth does not need to be constructed. It reveals itself when you become quiet enough to see it. There is a line in the Zen tradition: the great way is not difficult if you just don't pick and choose. This does not mean you become passive. It means you meet each moment without splitting it into good and bad, success and failure, known and unknown. You simply meet it. And that meeting, in itself, becomes transformation. The mind will return. It will want to define, to measure, to compare. That's its nature. But now, you know that you don't have to follow it. You can smile at it, you can watch it, and you can choose not to engage. This is emotional surrender in its purest form, not shutting down, but stepping aside, letting experience flow through without the filter of control, letting life show itself instead of trying to arrange it. You begin to live in response, not reaction. You begin to listen, not just to thoughts, but to what moves beneath them. Not knowing becomes a refuge, a space where your heart can rest, no longer forced to explain its own beating. And the more you rest there, the more you begin to sense that the answers you were searching for are not missing. They were never answers to begin with. They were experiences, moments, connections, acts of presence, glimpses of something real, something still, something that doesn't need to be understood to be true. And now, you are ready to meet life from that place. Not armed with knowledge, but open with wonder. As you rest in not knowing, a subtle shift occurs. The sharpness of needing life to make sense begins to soften. You find yourself sitting beside your own uncertainty without judgment. But something else begins to surface too. Not anxiety, not confusion. It's the quiet realization that parts of you are still broken, not in the dramatic sense, not shattered on the floor, just fractured in quiet, invisible places. Places you stopped trying to fix, pieces you left behind because you thought they didn't matter anymore. But now, in the silence, you see them again. And what you feel is not shame, it's a strange kind of tenderness. The spiritual journey often begins with hopes of transcendence. You want to rise above. You want to escape the chaos. You seek light, clarity, strength. But what if the deepest growth isn't found in rising, but in returning to what was broken? Not to repair it, but to see it differently. The Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi holds this truth beautifully. It is the art of finding beauty in